The following is a production of the University of Minnesota.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shelley Fisher. I work at the Learning Abroad Center here on the Twin Cities campus, and I am the official timekeeper for this session. And I am using the mic only because this session is being recorded. So if you would like to ask a question, please come up and, well, raise your hand or something, and in some way I will get you the microphone so that we can all have it recorded. And our presenters today for Carla's goal, foreign language across the curriculum, are Elaine Terone from the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition, Carla, at the Twin Cities campus, and Carol Klee from the College of Liberal Arts, also from the Twin Cities campus.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. I'm going to present a bit of history, historical overview, both the general national context as well as what's happened before on the U of M campus and Twin Cities campus. And Elaine is going to talk a bit about possibilities for the future. So I'll start simply by mentioning that over the last 50 years, the U.S. government has repeatedly put emphasis as well as funding into language education, beginning back in 1958 with the National Defense Education Act, which provided actually fairly large amounts of funding for foreign languages from elementary school all the way through the university level. And in fact, I'm a product of that program. Spanish was introduced in my second grade classroom, and I continued through middle school, high school, college, and ended up becoming a Spanish professor, in part because of the NDEA. In 1978, Jimmy Carter established the President's Commission on Foreign Language and International Studies. They also expressed great concern about insufficient foreign language education in this country. There was some funding put behind that, but certainly not enough. And one of the most recent initiatives is the Washington, D.C. Summit of University Presidents on International Education. This was called in 2006 by President Bush, who invited a select group of presidents to talk about the national need for improved international education, specifically knowledge of other languages and cultures. Our president, President Brunix, did attend that summit, and out of it came the National Security Language Initiative, which has funded programs to promote higher levels of proficiency in critical languages and cultures. And the critical languages are defined by the U.S. government. They include Arabic, Persian, Hindi, Indonesian, Korean, Punjabi, Turkish, Urdu, Chinese, Japanese, and Russian. A number of other initiatives have occurred as well. Partly out of this one, there has been a stress on bringing university students to increased levels of language proficiency, to professional level proficiency. And oftentimes, our language majors don't even attain that level of proficiency. So it's really a call to language departments and to universities in even a broader sense to improve programs so that students can attain those levels. The Modern Language Association has also recently called for advanced language and culture learning and what they've termed translingual and transcultural competence as a goal for language majors. And this would involve the ability to step outside of one's native language and culture and see them from the perspective of others. So there's a call from a number of places to really improve language education and help students attain higher levels of proficiency. Now, one way to do that is certainly not just to have language majors, but to help students infuse languages across the disciplines. So in traditional disciplinary curricula on political science, history, economics, agriculture, etc., normally students are using English language readings and multimedia. And oftentimes these materials do not sufficiently challenge a U.S. Anglophone perspective. And again, reliance on content and materials only available in English limits what students can get out of the course. How deep can an understanding of a field be if the materials are only in English and if there's no access to materials that have not been translated? So, out of concern about this, initiatives began in the 1980s. And I'm going to talk a bit about the history of these initiatives at the University of Minnesota, but I'll also mention that nationally these have resulted in an organization called Culture and Languages Across the Curriculum, or CLAC. In fact, you're going to be hearing quite a number of acronyms this afternoon, CLAC and FLAC and FLAC and FLIP we'll be talking about. But the idea basically is to infuse international content, but also language use across disciplines outside language and literature departments. As I mentioned, efforts began at the University of Minnesota in the 1980s. In 1985, the College of Liberal Arts strengthened its foreign language requirement. It used to be basically the equivalent of 1 year plus one culture course in English. In 1985, it was strengthened to require the equivalent of 2 years university-level instruction. And it was quite innovative in the fact that it was proficiency-based. Students had to demonstrate proficiency in speaking, listening, reading, and writing to complete the graduation requirements. But out of this strengthened requirement, the question came, a language requirement for what purpose? So we wanted to have students again, across the disciplines, across a variety of majors, be able to use the language abilities that they had acquired in study in their major. Now, the primary goals, there were 4 of them, of our FLAC program, our Foreign Languages Across the Curriculum program, were the following. The first was to convince undergraduates that there were benefits to studying a second language, and among those was deepened understanding of their major and broadened cultural perspectives. A second goal was to hone their abilities, their critical abilities, with regard to significant texts and sources in a second language, basically to help them see what kinds of deepened knowledge they could get from texts, particularly those that had not been translated into English. A third goal was quite ambitious, to promote lifelong and lifetime competency in a second language. In other words, once they acquired reading skills in the language, there's no reason they couldn't turn to the internet and read a newspaper on occasion in that language. And finally, we wanted also to provide incentives for faculty. Many of our faculty have language skills that they use in their own research, and we wanted to provide them with the opportunity to use those skills in the classroom and also serve as a model to students on how languages could, in fact, enhance their understanding of a discipline. We began with a number of different types of FLAC courses, foreign language across the curriculum courses. The most common model was a 1-credit enhancement or discussion section that was tied to a course in English. There might be a course like modern French history, and again, the main course was taught in English. It would have a number of discussion sections, but at least one of them would be held in French. For that discussion section, students would read text in French, about 10 pages a week. Not many, it was only a 1-credit section. They would, to understand those texts, draw on background knowledge acquired through the lectures and through the readings they were doing in the principal course, that main course, in English. And again, to enroll in these courses, students needed simply to have met the College of Liberal Arts language requirement. So they had 4 semesters of language study. So they needed support to read texts in the foreign language. We asked professors to look particularly for texts that had not been translated into English and texts that preferably added a new perspective on the topic, one they weren't getting from the primary readings for the course. To help students, the faculty or the research assistants developed reading guides, which included pre-reading material that would provide the background knowledge, historical, social, political, to help them frame the text and understand it. Reading questions, what types of things they were to focus on as they read the text, as well as post-reading discussion questions that would be the focus of the classroom activity that week. And discussion sections themselves were held in the second language. They were run either by the faculty member or the research assistant, teaching assistant in this case, or by both. And students in those discussion sections were then oftentimes asked to share their insights from the materials that they had read and the discussions they'd had to those in the main course. And again, this relates back to the first goal of our FLAC program. How do you convince undergraduates that knowledge of a foreign language is in fact useful and is useful across a variety of disciplines? We offered quite a number of different enhancement sections in the social sciences. And you can see a number of the courses there. In geography, only in German. We had a faculty member there who was terrific, Helga Leitner. In history, there were sections offered in a variety of languages: Scandinavian, Italian, Spanish, German, French, and Russian. In political science, there was a section, Spanish section tied to a Latin American government and politics course. And in sociology, surprisingly enough, there were quite a number of languages represented: German, Japanese, French, Chinese. Now, there were a number of advantages of these one-credit enhancement sections. First, they could be taken by students with the minimal with just having met the foreign language requirement, with simply 4 semesters or 2 years of college level work. And again, because they were provided with support to read these texts, they were able to handle fairly sophisticated text in the second language. We sent out a questionnaire in 1995 to 250 students who had participated in this program between 1989 and 1995, and we had a response rate of 70%, which was pretty good because many of them had graduated already. The students evaluated this experience quite positively. We asked them if their language skills had improved as a result of it. They said they were strengthened somewhat in the enhancement sections. We didn't expect huge improvement in language skills. These were only one-credit course, one-credit sections. They only met 1 hour a week. They were only reading 10 pages a week, but they still found them valuable in that regard. Most faculty, not all, but most, and I'll talk about some that did not find it enjoyable, but most reported that they enjoyed teaching these sections and that they found them to be worthwhile. Time intensive, but worthwhile. Now, challenges. We also had some challenges in terms of offering these sections. There were a number of sections offered, particularly in the LICTL as less commonly taught languages, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, and even German, that were prepared by the faculty members, and then no students enrolled. So enrollments were an issue for some of the sections. For some faculty, it was very difficult. They found the language level of the students too low for what they wanted to do. And I think in particular of historians working with medieval texts, which can be challenging even for native speakers of the language. They did not find the discussion sections, particularly these enhancement sections, they didn't meet the goals that they had. And we found this program difficult to sustain once external grants ended. We had grant funding from NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, and from FIPSI that provided faculty with summer funding to develop the courses. They had an RA in the summer to help them select the texts and prepare the reading guides, and then they had a TA to help them actually teach the enhancement sections. And once funding ended, that level of financial commitment was impossible to sustain. And many of the faculty members were committed to this and continued some of the sections on an overload basis, but it became quite difficult. There are still some. Sarah Chambers in the Department of History continues to offer a discussion section for her course on Latin American history, which is taught by a TA. So there are a few efforts continuing, but most of these courses have now disappeared, unfortunately. Another model that has been used were full courses in a discipline outside the language department offered in Spanish, French, or German. And I've listed some of the Spanish courses offered in anthropology, international relations, which is now global studies, in history, and in political science. These were offered sometimes by faculty members, sometimes by advanced graduate students in those areas who were either very advanced speakers of the language or native speakers of the language. And tied to this program, in the late 90s, a FLIP, or Foreign Language Immersion Program, was begun. And under quarters, this actually worked quite well. Students took a full load of courses during one quarter, completely in French, Spanish, or German. To enroll in this program, we required at least 3 years of language study, and students with only 3 years, in fact, found it quite challenging to do all their coursework in a second language. And here's a sample flip term in Spanish. There were 2.5 courses. The foreign language news coverage course was 2 credits rather than 4 in the social sciences, and then students selected one course from the Spanish language, culture, linguistics, or literatures program. This program, we found, has been more difficult to sustain under semesters. It's obviously far more of a credit commitment by students. So fewer students have enrolled under the semester system. Some of the challenges, or the other challenges, in offering both FLAC, the foreign language across the curriculum, or the FLIP, foreign language immersion program, have been the need for yearly workshops for the instructors who teach in this. When the FLIP, I think, quarter was first started, actually it was in the mid-90s. It was started without any type of instruction for the, in this case it was a graduate student who was teaching a history course. And he was Latin American. He had taught a course on Latin American history in his home country to native speakers. And I remember on the first day of class, he assigned students 200 pages of reading in Spanish, and he almost had a riot in the classroom. He really didn't have a clue of how to adapt the course, the syllabus, the amount of reading to the needs of second language learners. And so obviously there's a need for yearly, if not semester, workshops for instructors so that they learn sheltering techniques and how to develop. Actually, it's required in the development phase of the course. There's also a need for coordination and advertising. Again, as I mentioned, one of the issues was getting sufficient enrollments in these courses, both in the enhancement sections, a little bit less in the Spanish, full-fledged Spanish courses. We were able to get sufficient enrollments. But there really has to be a sustained effort at advertising. And when courses are offered more regularly, the word gets around to students as well. And that was one of the issues. Courses were offered sporadically, and so students weren't able to plan oftentimes in advance. Another issue is the range of courses offered. You'll notice that the courses are all in social sciences within the College of Liberal Arts. There might be interest in expanding to agriculture, for example, in CFANs. Potentially, these kinds of courses will be extended to the Carlson School of Management, who's applied for a cyber grant to enhance language instruction in business education. Right? And one of the main issues, which I've already mentioned, is cost and sustainability issues. And I will now turn the floor over to my colleague Elaine, who is going to talk about how to resolve all this.
Thanks a lot. Both Carol and I are involved with a center called CARLA, Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition. I'm the director. And in our position with Carol's experience working at the university with these models, and with me coming in just at the time when a lot of federal money has become available to bring Americans to higher levels of proficiency in foreign languages, we're looking out and saying, you know, it should be possible to return and actually do better at what has now become kind of an abandoned model on our campus. The Modern Language Association, in its report, said that foreign languages departments tend to have a very restrictive two-tier view of what they do. Students do language learning in the first 2 years, and then in the second 2 years they do literature. That's a silo kind of model where the language use remains within the department. And the question that Carol raised that the LAC model really raises is foreign language for what? Right? What if students want to use their language for some purpose in another discipline, in another department, or another college? One of the things that I want to do is to ask us to think now about where we are today as opposed to in the 90s. The model has fallen away with the lack of federal money. If there's no federal money for language across the curriculum, FLAC and FLIP, the Tappet brothers, I like to call them. If there's no federal funding, then we don't offer the courses. Is there a way that we can develop a sustainable model to provide opportunities to use language in the disciplines? And I'm going to look at 3 different facets of a possible solution. The first is to recruit world language proficient students who are on our campus. They're already in the disciplinary pipeline. So there is an influx of potential students that maybe weren't there in the 90s, and I want to talk about that. The second is, can we redesign international and global perspective requirements to include FLAC and FLIP? So CLE requirements are there. Everyone is supposed to take certain courses. There's an international and global perspective requirement. Why not include language as a part of that? And the third is to address this issue that Carol touched on briefly at the end, that in a way what we've done in the past kind of fell through because of lack of coordination. We didn't have a coordinator. We didn't have a point person. And so maybe we can do more if we have that. And not included in this are the factors that Meredith mentioned over the lunch hour, which is that the students coming in now are globally connected in a way that they absolutely were not, even 10 years ago. The technology makes things possible that were not possible 10 years ago. So there are a number of things that have happened in the interim that should make it possible for us to do some very innovative things to try to rebirth language across the curriculum for the 21st century. So the first is to take a look at students who have language skills who are on our campus who could take courses. So the enrollments should be there. And we know, for example, students who return from study abroad, lots and lots of stories that they come back after having learned to use French in France, and they say, where can I take a course so that I can maintain the language gains that I've made? And by the way, I'm not a foreign language major. I am majoring in engineering. I want to work on my German for engineering purposes, or I'm in business. What can I do? And what we hear is, okay, they have high levels of proficiency. They've taken coursework when they were overseas, so they know that they can do that. They look for coursework. They're capable. The coursework isn't there. So for these students, we're failing these students in not having more vision in terms of what we offer. Another group to think about are heritage language students. Many more heritage language students on our campus now than in the 90s. These are students whose use of a language other than English is social. It's their home language. It's something they picked up. Maybe they have speaking and listening skills in Russian. And what they want to do is to build on that foundation by developing academic skills in the language. Now, Russian, as an example, this is a critical language that the government wants to invest in. And I know from talking to the woman who teaches Russian, it used to be in my department, she's at her wit's end with heritage language Russian students who can't read and write Russian, right? So they're there. There's a kind of mismatch between our Russian courses, which are not designed for them. But there are, part of the NISLE initiative that began, that Carol mentioned, there are a number of programs that have sprung up just in the last 5 years. One of them is the Language Flagship program, which has set up K-16 language pipelines in particular areas of the country. One of them is in Michigan in Arabic. And that is a program that is working with heritage language students in Michigan, trying to bring them to Michigan State University, and has now graduated some of their first Arabic language users. They can handle the coursework in a program that's set up for them. There are also students at other institutions. Now, we're a member of the Big 10, 11 or 12, whatever the number is, but in our network, there is a system that is set up to deliver low enrollment courses via interactive video and online mechanisms from one CIC institution to another. So we have, for example, offered Hindi taught by somebody on our campus in the CLA Language Center, and delivered it to another campus in the CIC. We have received a course on Yiddish also, so there's a group of students who took Yiddish in the Language Center, taught by somebody in another CIC campus. So technology is going to make it possible for us to share whatever courses we offer, perhaps across campuses. So if we offered flipped courses, if we offered one of the courses that Carol showed us now, today, and we did it using CIC Course Share, we could boost enrollments in that way. We'd want to recruit sister institutions to offer flipped courses that are of interest to us. Right, and this, what we're talking about now, is happening on a number of campuses that are asking the same questions that we're asking. How can we boost enrollments in our low enrollment language courses? How can we offer language across the curriculum so that we have a course with a content of business in German? A business German course is offered at Michigan State, for example, and could that be delivered to us? Can it articulate with a course that we develop in the Carlson School using the new funding where I'm sure they're going to get? Knock on wood, okay. Okay. And finally, I would like to suggest that we recruit freshmen who come in with language skills. I know for a fact that here I'm looking at language immersion students. Now at Carla, I am in a good position to see the growing numbers of American students that are coming out of our K-12 institutions, especially in Minnesota, with untapped reservoirs of language proficiency. We could schedule FLAC and FLIP courses, indeed, where students coming out of immersion programs are still in high school. They are perfectly capable of taking courses that we might develop as they're in high school. Let me just describe to you what these programs are like. Well, let me just finish. You can articulate the instruction that's happening in immersion programs, and in an immersion program, I'm going to describe them to you in a second, but students are studying the normal subject matter, but they're just doing it through the medium of another language. So they come in experienced with the study of geography in a foreign language. My daughter in a Spanish immersion school, 15 years ago, learned the geography of the Great Salt Lake Basin and could talk about it in Spanish, but not in English in the 4th grade. So, I mean, she now has gone through post-secondary institutions where that ability was totally not available. I mean, it availed her nothing because there was nothing ready for her. So what is immersion education in K-12 settings? It's a form of bilingual education. The goal is a bilingual person. It's a sheltered classroom environment like the FLIP course that Carol was describing. So at least half of the subject matter is available through the medium of the language that they're learning as a second language, foreign language, or a heritage or an indigenous language. Some instruction is through the medium of the shared primary language, in this case English. So the students are getting some of their subject matter in English by the end of elementary school, and the other through the medium of the immersion language. So right now, there are K-12 students in the Twin Cities doing disciplinary work through the medium of a foreign language. They're meeting K-12 disciplinary standards, doing their standards testing in English, even though they've mastered the content entirely in French. They're in geography and history in Spanish, grade level math entirely in Chinese. There are 5 Chinese immersion schools in the Twin Cities area. And these students are experienced learners of languages, of content, across the disciplines. They are mastering the disciplines through the medium of another language. And yet we have had nothing for them at the University of Minnesota. Can't be many. How many are there? It must be tiny. Well, the National K-12 Foreign Language Survey has been done by the Center for Applied Linguistics. They've tracked trends over 2 decades. So they did a survey in 1987, 10 years later, and the most recent in 2008. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they have found. Basically, the numbers of survey respondents saying they offer an immersion program has grown. 1987, only 2% of elementary schools offered immersion programs. In 97, it was 8%. And the most recent, 13% of public elementary schools in the nation and 2% of the private schools that offered a Spanish or French program offered it through immersion. And this is a chart that shows what the languages are that were studied. Spanish is the purple one, obviously 42.6%, the most frequent. Next is French, the maroon. Then Hawaiian, because that's an indigenous immersion program to revitalize the indigenous language. Japanese is the pale blue. Then Mandarin, which is 3.9% and growing exponentially, I have to say. Then German, which is dwindling at the expense of Chinese, by all reports, and so on. Lots and lots of other languages, many of them indigenous, Yupik, Dene, Norwegian and Swedish even. Right? In Minnesota, this is the pattern of growth in these programs since 1976. You can see that there are now 11,000 immersion students in 52 K-12 programs in Minnesota, right? 52 of them. So 11,000 students who could be coming to the University of Minnesota as global, the new globals, right? These are the languages in Minnesota, very similar to the national. Spanish, 50% are Spanish. Then French is 11%. German, there's a German immersion school in my neighborhood. Chinese, 10% of them now are Chinese already, and Ojibwe. Most of the elementary immersion programs are in the Twin Cities area, and what's happening now is that the parents who put their kids into these schools are looking for secondary options. And so what has happened in the past often has been you've had kids learning language and sounding really great to the end of the 6th grade, and then there's nothing for them. My daughter went to a school that will not be named, in which she entered a very traditional Spanish class where she sat in the hall and did worksheets because she was so much better than everybody else and got lots of pop, as I understand it, as a reward. It's abysmal. Now many program graduates are going on to secondary schools. There are some secondary schools for immersion students, both in St. Paul and Minneapolis. There are some academic courses in a couple of schools, but mostly they're looking in vain for an academic class that they could take through the medium of another language. A strategically positioned course at the University of Minnesota offered for post-secondary educational options, I think would bring droves of these students to our campus. So, in summary, we could be recruiting students who have language skills. I haven't even mentioned international students on our campus who come in native speakers of these languages, but I'll mention them in a minute. They have these world language skills. They're from study abroad, heritage, other campuses. They're international students. They're from immersion schools. They have the levels of language proficiency to study the disciplinary content through the language if we had the coursework and if they knew the coursework was there, if it were well advertised and so on. One thing that has occurred to me is I took a look at required global perspectives courses on our campus. The CLE requirements require most they require our undergraduates to fulfill a global international perspectives breadth requirement. So undergrads are required to learn to understand the world from new perspectives, right? That window on the world. What could provide a better perspective, different perspective on the world than a knowledge of another language? To fulfill a global perspectives requirement at the University of Minnesota, there is a list of theme courses, 67 of them in a wide range of disciplines. Out of the 67 global perspectives courses, only 3 say anything at all about language, and all 3 are in the foreign language departments. Right? The vast majority of these courses that promise to give you a new global perspective are filtering what they're teaching through the medium of the English language. And as Carol said at the beginning, that's going to really restrict how much of a global perspective, how deep the perspective is going to be. What is the homogenizing influence when we're offering this global perspective entirely through the medium of the English language? Right? And wouldn't these 1,000 level courses, because they're mostly freshman level courses, wouldn't these be great LAC offerings? Wouldn't they be attractive to post-secondary education option students, for example? An example, I love history courses as examples of this. Take History 1032, Europe and the World. It's a large enrollment first-year course, has many discussion sections with paid TAs to run them, all offered in English. But what if 2 or 3 of those discussion sections hired people who are proficient in another language and able to deliver the same content through the medium of Spanish or French or German, all European languages? You get extra points in the course or credit towards a global studies certificate. Many ways to induce enrollment in courses like that. And these FLAC sections could use original source material in the language, accessible through the internet now. Students could be doing their own independent work as in group work in these courses to bring independently new information into the course and a new perspective that would enrich the content for everybody in the course. Right. So knowledge of the language and participating, being able to use the language for a purpose would empower the students. It would be deeply experiential. It could be learn by doing, learn to get to the information through the language and bring it back into the course. Now the students become experts about the Spanish viewpoint on the event in question that week, or the French viewpoint, or the German. Again, can U.S. undergrads do this? I think they can. I've already said there are lots of people in the pipeline who have these skills. And principles of content-based language instruction, Carla, the language departments, Carol's department, Spanish and Portuguese, we're prepared to do preparation for teachers and these TAs in these sections. In addition, we might want, these sections could be very inexpensive. One of the CLAC options that we have learned about through the Consortium on Cultures and Languages Across the Curriculum, it's this small group of colleges and universities across the nation who have devoted themselves to LAC, Language Across the Curriculum models. SUNY at Binghamton has a model called LXC that has sections like this taught by international students, right? So we could have international students who are native languages and perhaps majors in the field in question be the ones to lead these discussion sections. Actually, they might even volunteer. The Culture Corps is a group of volunteers who go out into the K-12 schools to talk about their culture. Why not keep them here? Why not keep them on campus to deliver these courses? It would be free. We can provide FLAC and FLIP training, as I say, through Carla, through the Second Language Studies program, Teaching and Learning Services. That we can do so that they don't ask students to read 200 pages in the first week. I think that what is needed is a FLAC or FLIP coordinator who can bring all of this together. And this is the one piece of funding that might need to be provided. If we had one person, as at SUNY Binghamton, that's a very successful program over 25 years. They have a coordinator whose job it is to recruit students, organize sections, provide the teacher training. How can we do this? I mean, we have the students. I think we have the potential teachers. We have all the pieces of the puzzle. But I think what's needed is some kind of institutional funding for one centrally placed program coordinator to keep the information and enthusiasm about this model going, to advertise it across languages, across disciplines, across colleges, and to help us provide and coordinate content-based language training. Again, the SUNY Binghamton model has resulted in a long-term self-sustaining model without external grant funding. A logical place for this might be CLA Language Center as a place to house a person like this, but it's just a thought. So, why can't we provide world languages and cultures across the curriculum? I think I've shown you there are more world language skills on our campus in the undergraduate, CIC, and the local population than we have recognized. The students are there. We have the capacity to identify and recruit them. We are wasting their talents if we don't. There are curricular options, global studies courses, the options that Carol laid out for you, the FLAC models, the FLIP models, post-secondary educational options to bring high school students to our campus. What's needed is somebody to bring it all together and support for that person and awareness, funneling our students to that information source and then using the information to build a truly sustainable languages across the curriculum model. That's it. Am I on time? Great. Okay.